We're back with another episode of On Time, and our guest this time has done something quite interesting. He has done something that I believe is somewhat unique, or say completely unique, since unique isn't absolute. His name is Karel, but you'll better know him as Barrel Hand.
That's right. And for sure, he's not Swiss, because he did something different.
Yes.
Well put.
Yes.
Welcome aboard, Karel. Thanks so much for joining us here at On Time. We're excited to have you because you really did pull something off here. You really did ruffle some feathers.
Yes.
So let's talk about the thing that you did, which was reverse engineer, and not reverse engineer like, say, a standard time-only Rolex. You reverse engineered something that made waves when it initially appeared as a watch company, as a watch brand. So talk about what you did and what happened. What was kind of the result of that and what you're doing with it now?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. The project really started with an introduction to watchmaking. So I was scrolling on YouTube and I stumbled upon these crazy CGI videos of these ultra high-end watches, and I had never heard anything about it. And it was the Urwerk UR202 promo video that they did. So I was watching it and I was just blown away by the engineering behind it and all the design and development that went into it. So I was convinced that I had to own one of these. And at the time, I didn't really know how much a watch like this could cost. I thought, I'll save up. Maybe it's like $500. I had no idea the realm of watchmaking at the time, So when I looked it up and I saw it's like the price of a house at that point, I kind of stepped back and was not intimidated, but just blown away by this world of the watchmaking industry that I had never known. And so that kind of got me thinking, well, I knew I wasn't going to own one anytime soon. So I was trying to figure out a way that I could, interact with one for the time being. And so that's how my CAD project kind of started, where I started compiling hundreds of pictures of the Urwerk, top views, side views, and getting all the overall dimensions of the watch, and then scaling that down and creating a whole CAD assembly of every single part within the watch.
So my question to you is this. Obviously, the external part is not so difficult.
Well, you can get the proportions down pretty easily externally, but when it comes to internals, it becomes a lot more complex.
How the hell did you pull that off? Did you have an actual Urwerk that you used as an example? Did you find illustrations? I mean, how did you pull that off?
Yeah, so the funny thing is I had never seen an Urwerk in person until after I had finished the project. So the whole time that I had done all the CAD, all the R&D, all the prototyping, I had never seen an Urwerk in person, and it was all just through videos and pictures that I recreated it. So the way that I did the internals was a little bit more complex because obviously they're not posting the blueprints online. So what I had to do was I watched that promo video maybe 100 times, just going pause play over and over and breaking down each, because there's a lot of exploded views throughout the promo video. So you kind of get a feel for how the internals work, but there's no way to scale it. So I still had to design the engineering, the mechanics of it on my own. But I had some visual aid to kind of guide me through how the mechanisms functioned. And then from there, I just broke it down piece by piece and slowly started recreating it on the computer. And that took about a year to do all the manufacturing, or not the manufacturing, just the 3D modeling of it.
What drew you to the Urwerk specifically? Because I would imagine you probably could have reverse engineered a lot of things.
Oh yeah, well, I really like the Urwerks in general. As soon as I saw their watches, I was blown away because, they were doing something that's truly different from any other watch. Their case shape is completely unique. Their theme, they're just doing something because, that's what they feel is their best design, and they're not trying to please anyone but themselves. And I really admired that in their pieces because it's not a mass-produced piece. It's very niche and it's not for everyone, but I really like their motivation and inspiration to just do their own thing.
So let me ask you a question. I don't think you could be just a regular Joe Schmo and watch a YouTube video and then be like, I'm going to use CAD to reverse engineer your work. So speak about your background. How did you gain the experience? Maybe it was through schooling, maybe it was through work. Give us an idea as to where you got this experience to actually pull something like this off.
Prior to this project, I had been using CAD for maybe 4 years, And when I started the Urwerk project, I had just turned 18, so I was fresh into college. I was going towards a degree in mechanical engineering. For me, it was just a hobby. It was like a project that I wanted to work on just to see if I could do it. And the fact that for me, this watch was a holy grail, both in terms of mechanics and design, just drove me that much further to make that dream a reality.
This might sound kind of facetious or douchey to say, but
No, go for it.
When you found out how much the Urwerk cost, did you think to yourself, from the perspective of somebody who's going into mechanical engineering, were you thinking it really shouldn't cost that much? What impact did that have on you? Did it make you think the company is kind of douchey for charging that much, or what?
No, because the way that I understood it was a bulk of the pricing that goes into these high-end watches is not the manufacturing itself. It's really the R&D. And if you look at Urwerk's timepieces, the UR202, they probably spent 5-10 years researching and developing that design just to get it to work. And it's not like you can pull up a pre-made satellite display online. It's something that's never been done before, and it's not something that needs to be, there's no need for it. So the fact that you go out of your way to R&D something like this, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of time, and it's extremely cost intensive because you're probably doing 30 prototypes over the course of those 5-10 years just to make the product function as it should and make it wearable to the public. So I would think that the bulk cost, to me, 90% of a lot of these watches don't come from the manufacturing or the materials they use. It's really all the time and effort that they put into it, all the R&D that was put into that project to make that dream a reality.
So it sounds like to me, Karel, that you didn't really have an extensive past with horology. Am I right about that?
No, not at all. So prior to that project, the Urwerk project, I knew very little about watchmaking, but I did have a CAD and engineering background.
So were you not a wristwatch wearer at all before?
Prior to that, I had one watch that my aunt had bought me when I was younger. It was just like a Costco guess watch, something like that. And that kind of is what got me started into looking at watches online and seeing, what's the high-end engineering side of watchmaking. And that, to me, is what kind of drew me in once I realized that these were micro-mechanical sculptures for your wrist. It's practically like an engine that's running 24/7. I thought that was so fascinating, and I had to learn more about it.
Karel, let's go ahead and talk about the process of actually building this watch, this homage to Urwerk.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it took you about a year, right, to do the CAD.
Yeah.
And then how long did it take you to actually build the watch?
So the first year was spent largely doing all the CAD for it. So getting all the parts set up, making sure that they were dimensionally accurate. There's no point in recreating a watch if half of the parts look off or they're not dimensionally accurate. So I tried to keep it as proportional and accurate to the original as possible. And after a year of developing all the internal pieces, it wasn't my initial intention to manufacture it, honestly. I saw that I finally had a full assembly on my computer after a year of work. And then I thought to myself, well, damn, I got all the parts here. I might as well try to manufacture it. And I had very little manufacturing experience prior to that, but I figured it was worth a shot, and I was already halfway there. So I started prototyping these watches one at a time, and it took about another year to really get that prototype down to where it's functional like you see it today.
Are you doing 3D printing for every component or just for that time display module?
Yeah, it's a good question. So what I do is I use 3D printing as a means for R&D, because 3D printing right now is not there yet where you can manufacture a final piece with it.
Okay.
So what I try to do is I do all the R&D, which like we talked about earlier is really the bulk of the cost in watchmaking and just about any product that you would make. And so what I do is I was able to minimize those costs. So instead of charging thousands of dollars per prototype to test and refine my Urwerk homage, I 3D printed those parts for maybe a couple $100. And I was able to get a full assembly. It's still plastic. It doesn't function as well, but you get a rough idea of how the parts interact with each other that you can't really get on a computer model. And so I was able to do, I think I was up to 12 prototypes by the time I had finished. I was on the final piece of that Urwerk homage. So by breaking it down into 3D printed parts made it so much less cost intensive and a lot less time consuming than trying to machine each part and having to revise that part every time for 12 iterations. It adds up the cost pretty quick.
Oh, I can imagine. No, and it makes a lot of sense. And you actually ended up answering my second question, because I was thinking the same thing. In my mind, I'm thinking, I really don't think that a 3D printed watch would last very long.
It's not there yet. Well. Absolutely not. What I'm doing right now is I'm doing a lot of testing and research in new materials with additive manufacturing. So we can talk about that a little later too, because that kind of ties into my new project. But there's new materials, like you have titanium, you have stainless steel that you're able to 3D print. These are all pretty new technologies, and the precision is getting increasingly better, but you still have to be careful about how you use the materials and what the limitations are, because you can't make a whole movement yet out of these 3D printed steel parts. It's just not there yet.
Right. I know that you can 3D print cases out of titanium, for example, or potentially out of steel.
Correct.
But the issue, of course, with 3D printing is that you don't get, if you're talking about metal and you're talking about casting the metal, you simply don't get as strong and consistent of a cast, because it is this additive type of manufacturing. But,
exactly.
But on that note, I might be wrong about this, but as far as I understand, there is an existing technology, an additive manufacturing technology. It's usually abbreviated as LIGA.
Yeah. So they'll make a lot of gears that way, actually. Yes. So that's perfect, because I think people, when they think of 3D printing, they think it's kind of taboo, right? It sounds, you only think of plastic parts. It doesn't associate high end, but what people don't realize often is that a lot of these additive manufacturing technologies are already being used in the watchmaking industry. It's just not the large cases, or, you're not seeing it as much in the actual watch case, but you're seeing it in the gears, in the escapement wheels. Even the way that they develop some of the silicon escapements are also very similar technology.
In the watch world, not only is additive manufacturing being used, but it's actually held in essentially one of the highest regards. So LIGA manufacturing is what is used in higher end movements, because you're able to produce actually a more perfect, better product. And so LIGA it's an acronym, and because actually the technology is German, the acronym itself is German as well. It stands for lithography, Galvanoformung, and Abformung, which is basically lithography, electroplating, and molding. So that is how these pieces are then literally made. It's a lithographic production.
Right, and like you said, you get very precise parts out of it. So in that sense, it's an improvement off old technology.
Yes.
And it's already widespread throughout the watch industry.
When you finally built the final prototype, it was a working prototype, right?
Yeah, it still works to this day.
What did you use as a hairspring?
So actually what I did was I took a base movement and then I modified the gear train and attached a module to it to get that rotor assembly. So what I'm working on now is, at first I had used just like a Solitas movement, but now I'm trying to upgrade it towards maybe getting like a ETA or a Eterna in there.
Okay.
But all it was taking a base engine that I knew was already reliable, it's well reputed, and then creating a module on top of it that allows us to drive the complications of the Urwerk UR202, or really any complication you could dream up of.
That's actually how the Urwerk works. Anyway, the original Urwerk is a module, from what I understand. It's not a built from the ground up movement. It's a module on top of an existing movement. So you really did exactly what they did. And I was even thinking, and what I wanted to ask you was, is it just a module that you built and put on top of a movement? So yes.
Right. Yeah, just a module on top. And that allows you, in a way, it's more beneficial because you're getting the reliability of a proven movement. So you don't have to redesign the whole movement from the ground up. And you're able to really focus on the design of the module complication, and then, match those two together to get a full time display complication.
So the question that I've been thinking about the whole time was, does Urwerk, well, I guess they know it exists, but have they acknowledged it? And what was their response, or what has been their response?
Oh, it honestly couldn't have been more inspiring. So what happened was, after the article got published, Ariel Adams helped me reach out. I think Urwerk saw the article and they reached out to him to see if they could get in contact with me. And they actually invited me to go to Switzerland to meet with them during SIHH. That was about 3 years ago, I think. And so they flew me out to SIHH. They paid for my flight, hotel, the whole 9 yards. And then I get there and I got to meet Martin and Felix, and they were both super welcoming. The whole team there is honestly, they're very inspirational. They're very passionate about their craft. It was really, really cool to meet them because to me, I think if any other company, like let's say I had replicated or done an homage to a Patek Philippe or Rolex, I think I would have gotten like a cease and desist instead,
yeah, probably. Yeah, exactly.
But with Urwerk, they saw that I wasn't trying to disrespect them. I was really just so moved by their watches and I wanted to honor and learn from their watchmaking. So I was happy that they saw it that way. And I was even more blown away that they were willing to fly me out to meet with them.
That's pretty
incredible. That was really
cool
cool because, they even took the time to sit down with me because during SIHH, they're pretty busy. They've got meetings with investors, clients. It's a pretty hectic time to try to do a meet and greet with some 18-year-old kid. So for me to be out there and, they would set aside 2 or 3 hours a day just to sit down and talk with me about my watch and kind of compare theirs to mine and find the differences between the two is really, really cool.
I can actually say that everything that you've told me has been the most compelling positive reason for me to be interested in Urwerk, because just from a matter of aesthetics, the watch isn't quite my cup of tea, but to know that there are those kinds of people behind it is just very heartwarming, for lack of a better term. It's inspiring to know that there are people who aren't just, laughing all the way to the bank when they are able to extract the next 5-figure watch sale out of the next idiot.
No, I really got that feeling too when I was talking to them, meeting with them, because, they were just genuine, good-hearted people that absolutely were fanatics about watchmaking. And, you see that immediately when you talk to someone, and when you talk to maybe some of the really big companies where it's all about numbers, you kind of lose that passion for watchmaking. Whereas these guys were really driven to try to innovate and out new designs, new complications. Their motivation really inspired me, and that's kind of how I started doing my own project.
So did they offer you a job?
No, not really. We kind of talked about it because we talked about doing an internship at least. And
I'd say that's pretty close, actually.
It's pretty close.
Yeah. And I was 19 at the time, maybe. So it's not I wasn't even graduated from college. I was still just a kid. So to me, just the fact that I got to talk to them, I was already blown away. And yeah, we had talked about maybe doing an internship, but then with the distance, I was still finishing up school. So it didn't really make sense for me to leave school for a year to do an internship elsewhere at the time, since I was finishing up my degree. And so just the distance kind of made it to where it didn't work out. But I'm sure that, if I'd grown up in Switzerland, maybe this story would have taken a different path.
Sure.
But I'm glad that it ended up the way that it did, because they really inspired me to, they kind of told me, if you're going to be doing someone else's work, let's say I work for MB&F or Urwerk or HYT, it's really cool, but you're not involved with the creative process as much. You're having someone tell you what they want to create, and then you're working on a small portion of that entire project. They told me, if you really are passionate about the creative side and the R&D side, you should really try to do your own thing. Those words for me spoke volumes, because these guys were my idols. These guys were the people that I had looked up to for years. And so as soon as I got home from that trip from Switzerland, I started sketching out ideas, and that's kind of how Barrel Hand started, at least as a watch company.
You come back from Switzerland, you've got all of these kind of emotions, I guess, and you've got two people, Martin Frey and Felix Baumgartner. Is it safe to say that they were your kind of watch idols at that time?
Oh, absolutely.
All right, so you've got your two watch idols telling you that you've got something here, that you should continue to pursue it. What happens then?
Yeah, so from there, as soon as I got home, like I said, I just started sketching out all these designs and trying to come up with a mechanism that hadn't really been done before. And as you can imagine, in the watch industry, I feel like everything's been done 1,000 times over. And that's why you see all these brands kind of doing the same thing over and over. You know, they'll take a watch and they'll just do the same case, a slightly different dial, and some like slightly unique hands. And to me, that just wasn't exciting. I wanted to create something that was, if I was going to create a brand, I wanted to create something that was truly unique, both in mechanics and then as well as design. And so it took a while to really come up with a mechanism that I hadn't seen before. And part of that was the cam path linear display mechanism that you see on the barrel hand P1 that I'm developing.
So for the P1 mechanism, can you give us a little bit of an understanding as to what it does? Explain to us this mechanism that you have created.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two main mechanisms on the time display side of the watch, and that's the jump hour mechanism, and then there's a linear cam path display system. So the jump hour system, you guys are pretty familiar with. What I did is I used a Geneva gear instead of the traditional jump hour mechanisms. And what that does is it gives you a lot less parts that can go wrong. So a traditional jump hour has, 10 to 15 parts, and that just means more parts that are prone to breaking. The other issue with traditional jump hour mechanisms is that you can't run them backwards, or you can't set the time backwards. So what the Geneva gear allows you to do is it's still intermittent motion. So you do get this kind of jump hour display at the end of the hour, but you're only using, in my case, there's two parts. There's the driving gear and then the actual Geneva gear. And those two parts make up your jump hour mechanism. So instead of 10, 15 parts, you're down to two. So that reduced costs, and that also reduced points of failure as well. And then the linear cam path mechanism, that's something that I wanted to develop on my own. And so what I did with the linear cam path system is it's similar to how a record player works. So you have a pin, like a needle, that sits in a groove. And as the cam plate rotates around, the cam plate is basically the entire dial.
Oh,
so the
that makes
entire
sense.
dial rotates around, and it has a groove that's been carved out of it.
Right.
And then there's a pin that sticks into it and actuates this linear motion of up or down, and that displays your minutes.
Oh, okay.
So you have a cam groove in
Right.
a way. So it's kind of this curvature that you calculate that increases its radius over time so that you get this smooth linear actuation of the minutes.
So how far along in this project are you?
So right now, I've been working on the project for about 2 years, and we're 26 prototypes in.
Wow.
This is also a good time too, because I just finished. This is the last 3D printed prototype before I go into manufacturing. So what's great about that is I've spent very little on R&D since I've been 3D printing all of these prototypes. And like we talked about earlier, if I had tried to manufacture all 26 of those prototypes at 5 to 10,000 a piece, it just would have been unfathomable. I couldn't have afforded that as a college student. But being able to get these 3D printed parts at a tenth of the cost made it so much easier to fine tune and refine this design and get it to where it is today, to where now I have all the parts, they're all spec'd out. I know what the tolerances need to be, and I can send it to a manufacturer to get the parts machined. And I know that those metal parts are going to be close to where I need them to be. And maybe there's some refinement, but it's not going to be another 26 prototypes in metal. It'll be like maybe 2 or 3 just to get the transition from 3D printing to metal correctly.
Right. In other words, the fine tuning.
Right, exactly.
So my question to you, and kind of following up with what you just said, the R&D costs are extremely important and extremely expensive, and I think that's one of the reasons why the United States is kind of taking a backseat to watchmaking, because there are not a lot of people that really, quite frankly, have the balls to get something like this started.
No.
Because the costs, when they see the numbers, it just kind of throws you into this panic attack, right?
Yeah. And there's no infrastructure for it either.
Exactly. So that's actually what I was going to say. Because there's no infrastructure, a lot of the watchmakers that we've spoken to that are watchmakers based here in the United States are kind of tethered, and they're unwillingly tethered to the Swiss world because they kind of have to rely on them for certain parts that are not available here.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
With barrel hand, it sounds like you may not have that problem. Am I right here?
I'm trying to stay away from it as much as I can because, look, we got a lot of talented people here in the US, and I have no doubt that with the right infrastructure, we could knock out some really cool watches and get some really influential designs out here. We have tons of, really good manufacturers. We've got people, like for instance, on my project, what I did is I tried to source, the best of certain talents that I could find. So for instance, the strap on the watch, I found a local leather worker in Arizona that does all handcrafted straps. So she sources American bison leather.
Wow.
She hand stitches it. She gets like the Alcantara to back it. And, you get some beautiful straps here. So now I don't have to rely on a Swiss supplier for my straps. So that's like one box checked. Then I found a woodworker out in Arizona as well that carves these beautiful handmade like walnut boxes.
Mm-hmm.
And, you can find all these people, you just kind of have to look. And because there's no infrastructure right now, it makes it difficult for people to even start. But I think the deeper you look into it, you realize that we have all the skills and tools you need to make it here. It's just a matter of, getting it out in the light so that people can start building and designing their own stuff.
Right. And there aren't, to my knowledge, there's only one movement manufacturer that's actually making American-made movements that aren't just a clone,
Right.
and that's RGM.
Yeah.
Right, correct.
My question to you is this, and Chase, maybe you can help me out with this, is a lot of the manufacturers that used to exist in the United States, including Illinois Watch Company, are no longer around. Now, I don't know if the trademark is available. That is pretty much irrelevant. The copyright on the movements
They don't
is
exist.
over. Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
You reversed and engineered a damn Urwerk. So I'm assuming for you, maybe it's not going to be as difficult to take the base, Illinois Watch Company movement that are pretty damn plentiful. I mean, if you go on eBay, you can find a working one and in really good condition.
Yeah.
So is that something that you're considering, or maybe kind of elaborate more without giving too much away, that is obviously proprietary to you?
No. I mean, part of my whole project too is just transparency. I'm trying to document the project online as much as I can. I mean, there's people that have been following since like the first sketch that I drew that was going to be like the barrel hand P1 about 2 years ago. And I just document every prototype, what worked, what didn't, and tried to work my way up. And over the course of like my project development, I started out with a ETA like 6497. And, that's a good, reliable movement. It's Swiss. It's got a good reputation. It's got a lot of torque. So for my application, it was perfect. But I started hearing a lot of there's a lot of bureaucracy within the watch industry. And with the ETA especially, they started telling people that they were going to limit supply to third-party companies. So that includes people like me. And then so I was like, all right, well, I'm going to try to find someone else. And then they retracted that claim and said they would supply for another 2 years, but it's a lot of like murky water, and I don't want to deal with a company that's uncertain about how they're going to supply their movements and who they're going to supply it to.
Especially when you have an industry that's in such a terrible state, and there are
you
other
don't know
competitors.
Yeah. So you don't know where that's going to end up, and then you have to think about servicing, repairs, getting spare parts. And if you have this company that's constantly back and forth about who they're going to supply those parts and movements to, it's not something you want to deal with. And it just adds more stress on my end to the movement, and also more stress to the end customer, not knowing if their base movement in their watch is going to be serviceable a couple of years down the road.
Absolutely.
So what's the solution for barrel hand?
I spent a couple months looking around for different movements, and ultimately for me, it came down to specifications and trying to get the best substitute for ETA. And at the time, I started hearing a lot of articles about Eterna. So you guys are probably familiar with them. So I started doing a lot of research with that. And as you may know too, there's a couple other companies here in the US that are also using their movements.
Oh, yes.
And so I figured I'd test them out and see what it's all about. And they have a lot going for them. And as far as their movement goes, it's got way better power reserve. It's got way better warranty. So they do 2-year warranty straight from the factory, which ETA is not doing, or any movement company is doing for that matter. And then you also get the reliability of it. The timekeeping is a little bit better. So there was just all these things that to me spoke that this was maybe the new route for a base movement company. And so I contacted them. I got a couple samples, and I just kind of played around with them for the past couple months to see, what the breaking points are, what the limitations are, and see if it was viable. And that's when I started implementing my designs with that movement and swapping out the ETA, because to me it was a significant upgrade over the ETA. And although it's a little bit more expensive, it was a huge step up.
You're absolutely right. I think you definitely made the right decision. There's no question that the Eterna, the movements are far superior. Thank you, Karel, for spending your time with us. It was an absolute pleasure to talk watches with somebody who really does care, somebody who's very real and doing it the right way.
Yes, absolutely. And Karel, go ahead and take this opportunity to plug where we can find you and where we can get updated with your project.
The shameless flog.
Yeah,
Go
absolutely.
For it.
So a lot of my project documentation is going to be on Instagram. That's just @barrelhand. And I post pretty much every day, just day in, day out, what I'm doing on the project, getting feedback. So if ever someone wants to critique the project or provide input, I'm always happy to hear from other watch enthusiasts, because that's how the project gets better over time.
Awesome.
And then the other thing is the website. It's just barrelhand.com. You can check that out. And if people are interested in reserving, there's a spot where you can add yourself to the mailing list and stay updated on the project.
This episode of On Time was recorded and engineered by Michael Senderovich with supervision by Tim Haviyama.
Team OTP is Kenshu Production and Savada and Dune on social media.
Our theme song was composed and recorded by Hubie Wang.
For the entire OTP team, this is Mike.
And this is Chase. Thank you for listening to On Time.